With President Trump's tariffs now taking effect, one American automaker is now offering employee pricing on many of its vehicles to all its customers in the U.S.
Dollars out of reach all of a sudden, thanks to something called a market adjustment. And Ford dealers, they didn't just raise prices, they pioneered a blueprint to drain unsuspecting customers. The excuse? Market forces. The reality? A cold, calculated play on desperation. Imagine waking up to discover the truck you had budgeted for is now tens of thousands of it. All began when the global chip crisis crippled production, leaving lots empty and hearts full of hope. Instead of loyalty, some dealers unleashed a license to pad profits, and that single move shattered trust on an epic scale, igniting an industry-wide reckoning. Now the question is, who pays the price? And as the lines blur between supply and greed, can anyone truly escape unscathed? Stay with us, because the truth is more shocking than you think. The customer betrayal nobody saw coming. Some customers didn't just lose money, they lost trust, loyalty, and livelihoods. One story perfectly sums up how dark things got. A longtime Ford dealership employee and his wife were eagerly awaiting delivery of their Ford Bronco. They had been assured the price would be at the original manufacturer's suggested retail price when they placed the order, but only 6 days before delivery, the dealer dropped a bombshell. They were adding an extra $10,000 to the price. The woman was devastated. She broke down in tears outside the dealership, trying to process how the very place her husband had worked for nearly 2 decades would betray them. And it was not an isolated incident. Countless customers experienced the same last-minute markups, broken promises, and emotional manipulation. These shady tactics destroyed something far more valuable than money: trust. Ford's brand image took a hit it may never fully recover from. Buyers stopped seeing Ford dealers as partners and started viewing them as predators. The damage spread quickly. Stories flooded social media, forums, and news articles. People who had been loyal Ford customers for decades swore they would never buy from the brand again. What was once a bond between American families and their trusted dealership was shattered overnight. But that betrayal was only the beginning of the reckoning, because when trust is broken, customers don't just stay quiet. They look for revenge, and the fallout soon becomes impossible to hide. Just like that subscribe button. Hit it once, it won't be glowing red no more. Plus, you will be supporting us. Thanks. The hidden fallout: price hikes and fake scarcity. Ford promised to crack down on greedy dealers. They said they would punish stores adding outrageous markups. Yet behind the scenes, they quietly fueled the chaos. Instead of reining in dealers, Ford corporate increased the manufacturer's suggested retail price across their lineup. The logic was simple. If the sticker price was higher, maybe the markups would stop. But that move only poured gasoline on the fire. Popular models like the Ford Maverick, Bronco, and the F-150 Lightning shot up in price year after year. The base model F-150 Lariat crossed over $60,000, while the top trim Lightning skyrocketed past $98,000. Dealers kept claiming there was still limited availability, using that as an excuse to keep adding market adjustments. But the truth was different. Ford lots were quietly filling up, inventory levels were returning to pre-pandemic numbers, yet customers were still being fed the lie of scarcity. The real kicker? Customers had no idea how much of this was being manufactured behind closed doors. Photos started leaking of dealer lots full of untouched Mavericks, Broncos, and F-150s, all while dealerships were telling walk-in customers that they had to act fast or miss out. And just when customers started to walk away, that's when the real collapse began. The system was crumbling under the weight of its own lies, and the next chapter of this disaster would make everything worse. The collapse begins. Inventory piles and sales freeze. At first, dealers refused to lower their prices. They held firm, expecting buyers to cave. But buyers didn't. Instead, they walked away. They remembered how they had been gouged, tricked, and manipulated. They remembered how Ford dealers treated them when demand was high. Visit any Ford dealer today and you will see it firsthand. Entire rows of unsold inventory, vehicles marked at the manufacturer's suggested retail price, but still too expensive for average Americans. Salespeople are now quietly offering discounts, hinting at incentives, joking that they'll practically give you the truck for free. But the damage has been done. Customers aren't just walking away, they're fighting back. Buyers have learned to wait for prices to crash, to expose the fake scarcity, and to demand accountability. Some dealers are now so desperate that they are offering 5-figure discounts just to clear their lots. But the customer's trust is gone, and no discount can buy that back. And the worst part? The collapse isn't slowing down. Ford dealers built a system on greed, and that system is finally eating itself alive. The revolt. Buyers refused to pay. The buyers Ford tried to squeeze finally snapped. For years, they lined up, paid thousands over sticker, and fought for Broncos and F-150s. But then the cracks appeared. Quiet walkouts turned into viral confrontations. Forums lit up with stories of markups and broken promises. And that's when the real trouble began. The balance of power shifted in a matter of months. Ford buyers refused to play the dealership game anymore. Instead of bidding against each other, they formed online communities dedicated to warning others to walk away, to wait for a genuine discount, or to purchase from a competing brand. Stories of outrageous price jumps at the final hour circulated widely. One post detailed a Bronco negotiation that stretched over 6 months, only for the dealership to tack on a market adjustment of $12,000 the night before pickup. Rather than comply, the buyer left and urged hundreds of other potential customers to do the same. The results were immediate. Ford's financed truck sales plummeted. Models like the Bronco and the Maverick, once seemingly impossible to find, began appearing on lots with no takers. The same dealers who had boasted about record-high markups faced silent showrooms and vanishing foot traffic. A few tried to save face by offering lukewarm discounts, but for most buyers, the damage was done, and the outrage extended far beyond the physical showroom. Furious conversations spilled into every corner of social media. The anger soon reached the executive offices of Ford Motor Company, provoking a crisis the automaker never saw coming. Inside, the industry panicked. What happens when the sharks smell their own blood in the water? Behind Ford's corporate walls, top executives were swamped with grim data. Customers weren't just upset, they were leaving the brand in droves. Internal surveys revealed a startling drop in Ford's net promoter scores, even among buyers who had spent years championing the name. Those same franchisee dealers, who once reveled in the wave of hefty markups, now pleaded with Ford headquarters for assistance. They asked for rebates, subsidized interest rates, and factory incentives, claiming they could no longer sell trucks that had been collecting dust for weeks. Ford's leadership pulled in multiple directions, struggled to orchestrate a coherent response. A whisper began circulating. Perhaps the crisis was the perfect moment to accelerate a direct-to-consumer model. Some Ford insiders argued that the future lay in bypassing dealerships entirely. They pointed to electric vehicle manufacturers that had thrived without franchise middlemen. But such a radical shift incensed the dealer network, which clung to its legal protections and warned of lawsuits if Ford tried to circumvent them. Analysts started talking about a civil war within the company. On one side were executives demanding a modern approach. On the other stood longtime allies of the dealer system, insisting that Ford would betray its heritage by abandoning franchise partners. Meanwhile, inventory levels rose with each passing day, and public fury showed no sign of cooling off. In the midst of this turmoil, certain industry watchers noted how Ford's predicament could reshape the broader automobile market. If Ford abandoned the dealer model, other legacy automakers might follow. Independent dealerships now faced questions about their survival in a world that favored straightforward, online buying experiences. The fractures ran deep. A few bold voices inside Ford claimed that allowing outrageous markups had been the real betrayal, undercutting the faith of loyal customers. Others insisted that Ford corporate itself had triggered the crisis by hiking the manufacturer's suggested retail price, forcing dealers to escalate. Caught in the middle, upper management tried to placate everyone, only to enrage both camps. Amid this chaos, a more shocking twist emerged, not from disgruntled buyers, but from Ford's very top. The CEO's empty threat, how Ford's crackdown failed. Ford's chief executive officer, Jim Farley, stood before cameras and declared that predatory dealer markups would no longer be tolerated. He promised to oversee a rigorous crackdown that would protect customers and restore the brand's battered reputation. Disillusioned buyers latched onto his words, hoping the automaker would finally rein in the worst offenders. Then reality set in. Despite Farley's high-profile statements, no meaningful penalties ever materialized. Dealerships that had racked up complaints continued operating without repercussions. Some even boasted about their victory, telling staff they knew Ford had no genuine enforcement power due to franchise laws and local statutes. That realization sparked a second wave of public outrage. If Ford was truly committed to helping its customers, why did nothing change? Social media users labeled the crackdown as hollow theater. They accused Ford leadership of staging a public show while privately condoning inflated sticker prices. Frustration hit a boiling point. Ford's own credibility was at stake, and brand loyalty dropped further. Buyers who had previously given the company the benefit of the doubt now felt doubly betrayed. The automaker's carefully cultivated image of fairness and tradition was reduced to an empty slogan. And when corporate power failed, another force took over. The economy which dealers had invoked to justify markups now lashed back in brutal fashion. When the market turned against them, the same economy dealers used to defend their greed became their undoing. They had blamed supply chain bottlenecks, parts shortages, and global upheavals for driving prices skyward. Then the market winds shifted, toppling their fragile empire. Interest rates soared to their highest levels in many decades. Monthly payments on a new Ford F-150 broke $1,000, shutting out countless middle-class Americans who might have otherwise taken on a loan. Meanwhile, repossession rates climbed as owners who had succumbed to inflated prices realized they could no longer maintain those crushing obligations. Daily expenses also ballooned. Groceries, electricity, and housing all grew more expensive, compelling families to postpone any major purchase. Even those who desperately wanted a $70,000 Bronco or a $90,000 Lightning had to reconsider when faced with a shrinking budget. Dealership lots, once barren during the chip shortage, now overflowed with new vehicles nobody wanted to finance. Managers who had gloated about tacking on steep premiums were forced to slash prices, bundle accessories, or offer 0% financing just to move a handful of units. Yet in many cases it was too little, too late. Furious memories of betrayal lingered, and buyers refused to forgive so easily. Online communities remained vigilant, compiling lists of dealerships still clinging to old markup habits. Others advised friends to wait for deeper price drops or switch brands completely. Auction data showed an uptick in lightly used Broncos and F-150s as frustrated owners attempted to escape punishing monthly payments by trading in well before their loans were done. The financial meltdown spread beyond local showrooms. Economic forecasters sounded alarms, pointing to unsold inventory, depressed resale values, and the possibility of cascading defaults across automotive lending. Wall Street investors, once satisfied with Ford's ability to weather storms, started questioning its future prospects if buyer confidence did not rebound soon. By the time the dust settled, it was evident that no quick fix could restore faith in Ford's dealership model. The empire built on inflated margins and consumer manipulation was collapsing, dragging down even those dealers who had never participated in extreme price hikes. Longtime Ford enthusiasts wondered whether the brand could ever reclaim its stature in the eyes of the American public. As the crisis deepened, more analysts speculated that the entire structure of automotive retail in the United States was on the verge of transformation. Whether Ford could navigate that upheaval remained to be seen, but one truth was unshakable. An age of unchecked greed and broken promises had finally reached its reckoning. In the aftermath, many wondered if Ford's storied legacy could survive another blow. With consumer trust at a historic low, the looming possibility of legal battles, and a shifting economic landscape, the final chapter of this crisis had only just begun. From record profits to desperation sales, the Ford dealership empire was once a money-printing machine, bloated by unchecked greed and fueled by a market manipulated into utter chaos. During the darkest days of the global supply chain crisis, when microchip shortages and manufacturing delays crippled global automotive production, it was the dealers who sat smugly at the top of the food chain. They wielded absolute power over desperate consumers, gouging them with predatory markups and shameless price hikes. Some dealers brazenly added tens of thousands of dollars over the manufacturer's suggested retail price, knowing full well that buyers had no real alternative. If you wanted a vehicle, you paid their price, or you walked away empty-handed. For a time, it worked beyond their wildest dreams. Their profit margins exploded to historic highs, with countless reports showing dealers pocketing an average of $5,000 to $10,000 in profit per vehicle sold, an unimaginable figure before the chaos began. Some individual transactions became horror stories in themselves, with customers revealing they had paid $20,000, $30,000, or even $50,000 above sticker price for in-demand models. Dealers weren't just selling cars, they were printing money. The gold rush seemed unstoppable, and the dealership network reveled in it. They upgraded their showrooms, flaunted their record-setting profits, and expanded inventory as fast as they could get their hands on it. Headlines ran wild with stories of dealers clearing millions in pure profit month after month. But as with every boom fueled by artificial scarcity and unchecked greed, the writing was already on the wall. That bubble burst faster than anyone anticipated, as global production lines crept back online and supply chains slowly healed. Inventory levels across the country began to normalize. Suddenly, the same dealerships that had been holding customers hostage were scrambling. The days of automatic markups and long waiting lists vanished overnight. In their place came desperation sales, price cuts, and last-ditch incentives. Dealers who had once bragged about charging over sticker were now offering discounts, throwing in freebies, and even slashing prices below invoice just to clear out unsold inventory. What had once been an unprecedented seller's market flipped on its head into a brutal buyer's market. But by then, the damage was already done. Customers who had been fleeced, tricked, or outright exploited were not quick to forgive. The trust that had existed between dealer and buyer, fragile as it was, evaporated in an instant. And without trust, the entire dealership business model began to unravel. Yet the financial pain was only part of the story. Behind the fire sale prices and desperate deals lurked an even darker problem: debt. Massive, crushing, unsustainable debt. Many of these dealerships, eager to capitalize on limited supply and inflated demand, had overextended themselves. They took out huge financing agreements known as floor plan financing, short-term loans used to purchase and hold inventory on the lot. As long as vehicles kept flying off the lot, the interest payments seemed manageable. But when the buyers disappeared and the vehicles sat idle for weeks or months, those interest costs ballooned uncontrollably. Every unsold car, truck, and sport utility vehicle became an anchor, dragging the dealership deeper underwater. Faced with shrinking demand and rising debt payments, dealerships quickly found themselves in survival mode. They slashed prices, burned through cash reserves, and in some cases, sold vehicles at a loss just to keep the lights on. The empire they had built on scarcity, control, and predatory pricing was now crumbling under the weight of its own excess. And yet, the financial disaster was only the surface. Beneath the panic, something far bigger and far more dangerous was quietly unraveling. The EV bombshell dealers didn't see coming. While Ford dealers were desperately trying to offload unsold trucks and sport utility vehicles, slashing prices and offering unheard-of incentives, Ford Motor Company itself was quietly detonating a bomb beneath their entire business model. That bomb had a name: the Ford F-150 Lightning. When Ford first unveiled the all-electric version of America's best-selling truck, it looked like a golden ticket. The F-150 Lightning was marketed as the future of American manufacturing, a bold, game-changing vehicle that would let Ford leapfrog the competition and dominate the electric vehicle race. The corporate machine rolled out the red carpet. Executives promised a new era, hyping the truck as not just an innovation but a revolution. Dealers were not given a choice. They were ordered to prepare for this electric revolution. Compliance wasn't optional. Ford required them to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes even over $1 million, in charging infrastructure, technician training, software upgrades, and corporate-mandated facility renovations. Many complied, believing the hype and trusting the manufacturer that had sustained their business for generations. But the timing couldn't have been worse. Traditional truck buyers, the bedrock of Ford's success, were already frustrated and angry. After years of markups, broken promises, and shady sales tactics, they were done playing the dealer's game. And now those same dealers were filling their showrooms with high-priced electric trucks that their core customers didn't want, didn't trust, and simply couldn't afford. The initial excitement around the F-150 Lightning quickly turned to panic. The wave of early reservations collapsed under the weight of economic reality. Interest rates soared, monthly payments ballooned, and the average transaction price for a Lightning skyrocketed past $70,000, a figure completely out of reach for the average working-class American truck buyer. Inventory piled up at an alarming rate. Dealers who had borrowed heavily to build EV infrastructure were now stuck with rows of unsold electric trucks, paying floor plan interest on every single vehicle gathering dust. The very product that was supposed to secure their future had become a financial noose tightening around their necks. But the final insult wasn't the unsold trucks or the mounting debt, it was Ford's corporate betrayal. Behind the scenes, while dealers were drowning in EV inventory and choking on debt payments, Ford quietly explored a future without them. The company began developing direct-to-consumer sales models, cutting out the franchise dealers entirely. After more than 100 years of partnership, Ford was signaling that it no longer needed or wanted the dealers who had built its empire. Most dealers refused to believe it. Many convinced themselves it was just a threat or a negotiating tactic. But the writing was on the wall. Ford's electric gamble wasn't just about new technology. It was about dismantling the old system. And the fallout didn't stop there. What followed would drag the entire industry into a political and legal war unlike anything it had seen before. Political and legal backlash. The franchise war begins. The collapse of the Ford dealer empire didn't just unfold quietly behind closed doors. It exploded into the public arena, the courtroom, and the political battlefield. As sales cratered, inventory grew, and debt piled up, franchise dealers across the country realized they weren't just losing money. They were losing everything. Their businesses, their influence, and their place in the American economic system were all slipping away. And they weren't about to go down without a fight. Dealer associations mobilized like never before. These were not small businesses with no leverage. Franchise dealers had deep political connections, vast financial resources, and an army of lawyers. They launched full-scale lobbying campaigns aimed at stopping Ford's direct-to-consumer ambitions dead in their tracks. Millions of dollars poured into political action committees. State legislators were courted, pressured, and bombarded with one clear message. Ford Motor Company was trying to stab its own dealers in the back, and the government had to step in and stop it. In state after state, laws were proposed and passed to protect the old dealership model. Some states outright banned direct sales by automakers, forcing companies like Ford and Tesla to sell through traditional franchise networks. Others added layers of regulation, making it legally and financially impossible for automakers to bypass the dealers who had built their brands. At the same time, lawsuits erupted across the country. Dealer associations filed legal challenges accusing automakers of violating franchise agreements, breaching contracts, and undermining consumer protection laws. Court battles raged as dealers fought tooth and nail to preserve the system that had once made them rich. But for all their money, lawyers, and political muscle, none of it could change the one truth staring them in the face. The system itself was collapsing. Consumers were fed up. The media narrative had turned against them, and the once bulletproof relationship between manufacturer and dealer was shattered beyond repair. And the damage wasn't limited to the dealers. Ford's legacy on the line. The fallout from the dealer collapse wasn't just about profit margins, lawsuits, or showroom drama. It threatened something far bigger. It threatened Ford's very identity, the legacy the company had spent more than 100 years building. For over a century, Ford Motor Company stood as a symbol of American industry, working-class pride, and blue-collar resilience. It wasn't just a car company. It was an institution woven into the fabric of American life. But now, thanks to years of unchecked dealer greed, corporate betrayal, and broken promises, that legacy was crumbling in real time. The media feasted on the chaos. Story after story ran on national outlets, highlighting outrageous markups, deceptive dealer practices, and customer horror stories. Investigative reports exposed the worst behavior in the system. Dealers charging hidden fees, manipulating financing terms, and turning the simple act of buying a car into a hostile, exhausting ordeal. Social media became a war zone, flooded with viral videos of customers exposing unethical sales tactics, corporate betrayals, and the growing rot within the system. Hashtags calling out dealership scams and broken promises trended week after week. Ford's name, once synonymous with trust and reliability, was now linked to price gouging, corporate greed, and broken relationships. Ford's corporate leadership scrambled to contain the damage. Press releases promised reforms. Executives made public commitments to transparency and accountability. They announced new policies aimed at reining in dealer behavior and restoring customer trust. But the damage was already done. The narrative had shifted, and no amount of public relations spin could change it. What was unraveling wasn't just a financial crisis, it was a cultural collapse. The very idea of the American dealership, the handshake deal, the trusted family business, the local showroom at the heart of the community, was being exposed as an outdated, predatory system that had finally imploded under its own weight. The average customer no longer trusted the dealer. The average dealer no longer trusted the manufacturer. And the manufacturer, in turn, was actively working to eliminate the dealer entirely. The chain that had defined the American automotive industry for more than a century was broken. And what came next wasn't just the end of an era. It was the beginning of a reckoning that would shake the entire automotive world to its core. The industry bloodbath, who's next? Ford's collapse didn't just blow a hole in its own financials. It shattered the fragile house of cards the entire auto industry had built. Once Ford's inflated prices, desperate discounts, and empty lots became front-page news, the shockwaves ripped through rival automakers like General Motors, Toyota, and Stellantis. Dealers who once laughed at Ford's misfortune suddenly realized they were next in line. At first, it was a quiet panic. General Motors dealerships started slashing prices on full-size pickups, hoping to avoid the same inventory pileup. Toyota dealers, who had long enjoyed an image of stability, were caught off guard when customers stopped showing up to pay inflated prices for Tacoma and Tundra models. Stellantis dealers, riding high off the sales of Ram trucks, found themselves staring at lots filled with unsold vehicles. What began as Ford's collapse had turned into an industry-wide reckoning. It wasn't just about dealer profits anymore. Hundreds of dealerships across the country began quietly closing their doors. Communities that relied on these dealerships as anchors of local employment watched as showrooms went dark. Mechanics were laid off, and once bustling lots became ghost towns. Global suppliers who had ramped up production during the boom years started slashing jobs and cutting costs. The collapse of one brand had triggered a chain reaction that sent tremors through the global auto economy. And while the automakers scrambled to contain the damage, the political fallout was only beginning to boil over. The political firestorm. When Americans realized they had been priced out of the American dream by dealership greed, the backlash wasn't limited to angry tweets and protest signs. It reached the steps of state capitals and the halls of Congress. Voters weren't just mad at the dealers. They wanted someone to do something about it. State governments, facing pressure from unions and consumer advocacy groups, started drafting legislation aimed squarely at regulating dealer markups. Bills were introduced to cap how much a dealer could charge above the manufacturer's suggested retail price. Public hearings were held, where working-class buyers shared heartbreaking stories of saving for years, only to be blindsided by hidden fees and markups. Anti-monopoly activists, who had long warned about the power of dealership networks, seized the moment. They argued that the dealership model itself was broken, a relic of a bygone era that only served to enrich a handful of middlemen at the expense of American consumers. Protests erupted outside major dealership groups. Videos of politicians grilling auto executives went viral. It became clear that this wasn't just a consumer issue anymore. It had morphed into a full-blown political firestorm. But as politicians argued and activists rallied, the real victims of the collapse were struggling in silence. The working-class crisis, lost in all the headlines and political theater, was the painful reality that working Americans were the ones paying the heaviest price. For millions of blue-collar workers, small business owners, and tradespeople, a pickup truck isn't a luxury, it's a lifeline. And when Ford and its rivals pushed prices through the roof, those working-class buyers were left stranded. Family budgets that were already stretched thin crumbled under the weight of five-figure markups. Small business owners who relied on affordable fleet trucks to keep their operations running found themselves priced out of the market. Tradespeople, from electricians to landscapers, were forced to hang on to aging trucks, unable to justify the cost of a new one. The impact went deeper than just the sticker price. High-interest financing deals, extended loan terms, and ballooning monthly payments pushed countless Americans into financial distress. The divide between corporate America and the working class grew wider than ever before, and all because of a dealership-driven bubble that was never sustainable. And just when it seemed like the fallout had hit rock bottom, an even bigger shift was quietly taking shape behind the scenes. The death of the dealership model. What if the collapse wasn't just about greed or poor decision-making? What if it was the death knell of the traditional dealership model itself? As the dealership scandal unfolded, another revolution was quietly gaining steam. Direct-to-consumer automakers like Tesla had long sidestepped the dealership system, selling their vehicles online and delivering them straight to customers' doors. For years, traditional automakers dismissed this model as a niche strategy, but in the wake of the dealership collapse, they could no longer ignore it. Ford, once the champion of its nationwide dealer network, began shifting toward online sales initiatives. Pilot programs were quietly launched, allowing customers to order vehicles directly from the manufacturer without ever stepping foot in a dealership. Other automakers followed suit, realizing that cutting out the middlemen wasn't just more profitable. It was what consumers wanted. The writing was on the wall. The traditional dealership, once a fixture of American commerce and culture, was dying. And it wasn't government regulations, political protests, or financial collapse that would kill it. It was a fundamental change in how Americans wanted to buy their cars. In the end, the price wasn't paid by the customers who walked away. It wasn't paid by the politicians who pointed fingers or the executives who shifted blame. It was paid by the very dealers who had fueled the greed and built their empires on shaky ground. Their collapse wasn't just a cautionary tale. It was the final chapter in a broken system that had finally eaten itself alive. But that's enough for now. What I want to know is your opinion on all of this. Tell us down in the comments, and thanks for staying till the end.